Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. The relationship between Burma's Buddhist population and its minority Muslim communities has long been strained, but in the past few years violence between the two has dramatically increased. In 2012, Buddhist extremists attacked Muslim-dominated villages in Rakhine State, resulting in hundreds of Muslims being killed and thousands more displaced. And last year, more than 40 other Muslims, not Rohingya, were massacred in the town of Meiktila in central Myanmar. The Rohingyas in particular have faced a great deal of discrimination at both local and regional levels. According to most recent reports, the Rohingya have less access to healthcare, education and basic necessities, and they're also more likely to be arrested, abused and harassed by the authorities. In fact, even as Burma prepared for its first ever democratic local elections in 2010, they were not allowed to vote because the state didn't recognize them as citizens. So what is the situation in Burma 1 year after the Meiktila massacre? Why is there so much hostility to Muslims and to Rohingyas in particular? And why has the international community remained silent on the issue? Well, joining me to discuss this is Tun Kin, president of the Burmese Rohingya organization in the UK, and Cho Win, secretary of the Burmese Muslim Association, who's not a Rohingya but from Yangon, Rangoon. And on Skype, we're joined by Lillian Fan, research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute. Welcome to you all. But first, let's look at this video report.
It's been a year since the Meiktila massacre, in which 43 Rohingya Muslims were killed and many more injured after violent attacks by Buddhist activists. In one of the worst clashes between the two groups in the country's history, armed Buddhists reportedly torched down villages, looted homes and sexually assaulted women. Despite these attacks, little was said on the issue by the international community. Tensions between the majority Buddhist population and the Rohingya have festered for decades, although physical violence between the two has seen a dramatic increase since Burma had its first election in 2010. The worst of the violence came in 2012 in the western state of Rakhine, resulting in the deaths of over 200 people. As a result of the clashes, thousands of Rohingya were displaced, living in destitution on the country's outskirts or facing squalid living conditions in countries like Bangladesh and Thailand. Many argue that the rise in attacks was the result of politicians exploiting ethnic tensions to win votes, with some refusing to acknowledge the Rohingya as truly Burmese. The frequency of Rohingya killings, along with their treatment by Burmese authorities, have prompted many activists across the world to refer to the situation as a modern-day genocide. Prejudice against the Rohingya isn't limited to local communities either. According to Human Rights Watch, more than 500 Rohingyas are currently imprisoned because they got married without seeking the government's permission first, and because they're not a recognized ethnic group, they weren't even allowed to vote in the elections. Humanitarian groups like Amnesty International and Fortify Rights state that the Rohingya are being denied basic access to citizenship rights, like healthcare and education, and are far more likely to be arrested, tortured and abused by the police. Meanwhile, abuses against the Rohingya remain underreported, but awareness of the situation is growing. This week, US Congress held a debate on the plight of Burma's Muslims, with both Republicans and Democrats condemning Myanmar's government. Meanwhile, many have taken to social media to raise awareness about the situation in Burma, and many criticize the National League of Democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi of turning a blind eye to the atrocities despite running on a platform of peace and equality. Hussein Kizwani, Islam Channel.
Well, Cho Win, let me start with you. I mean, why did this massacre in Meiktila in central Burma take place?
Okay, first of all, how we look at the issue here. As a surface, when you look at the surface, this is Buddhist and Muslim riots, according to the several media which is published. In our understanding, this is not a riot. This is anti-Muslim violence, if we correctly articulated this issue. And second step, what I want to say a bit deeper, this is not religious or ethnic problems. This is totally Muslims are using as a scapegoat for political reason. This is not the first time. Since 1982, 83, 1987, 1989, there are several times until today we have Muslims of Burma, including Rohingya people, facing very, from all sides, like physical torture, political pressures, and social injustice. We have been discriminated and persecuted in several areas, and Rohingya Muslims are the worst situation. And I don't need to say, even because the UN has recognized them the most persecuted population in the world. And when we go back to the history behind, in 1960, in the election, for the first Prime Minister of Burma, UNU, his name was UNU, he declared in his manifesto that if he's elected, he will declare Burma is a Buddhist nation. So he win landslide victory in his election. So it gives us very clear evidence that Burma politic is using religion as a tool.
But what actually happened in Meiktila? Why did it suddenly get sparked
I'll
off?
I'll get to the point. And this is how, when we look at after the 2010, when President Thein Sein was elected, first he faced three major issues. The first issue, all three issues are, economic issues, like project between China and Burma Economic Holding Limited. This is owned by the cronies and generals. And these projects are very huge projects. And one of the projects is strategically very important for China, which is Shui gas pipeline. And the first project, dam project in northern Burma, which is public outcry, as soon as democratic reform was heard and people were allowed to express their opinion. And Burmese government also, they are forced to, the situation is like that, they have to accept, they have to listen to the public opinion that time, because they declared that we are going to reform Burma as a democratic country. So in democracy, government has to listen to public opinion. So they have to listen that time. And the second time was in Latparound copper mine project. This is very important because they are damaging environment, the local environments very hugely. The Chinese, all these three projects belong to Chinese. And these projects were, people were I think in the midst of the round about 2011, the whole politicians and civil societies also, they joined this trial to raise these issues that we are public people of Burma, we are against the project. It's harming the environment. That time, Burmese government used very bad way.
But come on, please, to the Muslim issue.
Yeah,
okay.
That point is going to that area. Why Burmese Muslim issue were raised? Because to divert the attention from these issues, these first, second, third issues are creating huge problem for the government. And the second one is, the last one is, 2011 by-election. Burmese government understand that when they declare democratic reforms, public would support them, but they are not support. They didn't get the support when they see the result of 2012 by-election. Among there are 46 seats were won by the NLD party, Aung San Suu Kyi party. It give them idea that people are still supporting Aung San Suu Kyi, and they need to create some atmosphere which is totally divert the public attention towards Muslim community.
Well, I'd like to come on to the issue on the ground between Buddhists and Rohingya. Do Rohingya have their own mosques? Are they allowed to freely have worship and so on?
Well, it's going for 2 years. Now the Muslims, the Rohingya Muslims in Arkan state, they can't pray. They can't go to the mosques, they can't go to the religious school, they can't get even, food and healthcare at all. That is the situations going on. And situation is getting much worse compared with even 2012 June. So when we talk about here the Rohingya issue, is how the situation is moving forward is clearly is genocide moving ahead. It's a marching to genocide or happening genocide right now. Because when you look at, you draw the whole issue. The Rohingya were a strip of the ethnicity 1962, a strip of citizenship 1982 law. Because of that law, I'm not a citizen of Burma, even though my forefathers were citizens. And after 1988, when military took power again, restriction of movement, marriage, education were going on ahead. And then what's happening these days is burn down Rohingyas' houses and move them to the concentration camp, keeping them in concentration camps. And last 3 months, what's happening is cutting off aid and medical health care, and children are dying, old men are dying. There is not food enough. People are dying in camps. So
well, let's bring
they're driven out the Rohingyas from Burma.
I'd like to
clearly, wiping out the whole minority Rohingyas from Arakan state.
Lillian Fan, can I bring you in now? Are
yes,
you there?
Question.
Yes. I mean, is there some economic basis to this? Why is the Buddhist majority community, which is so overwhelmingly large compared to the Muslims, why are they so prejudiced? Are there some economic grievances? Is it about land? What is the basis of it?
Well, I think it's a very complex issue, and it's certainly one which we need to understand through a historical lens. And I think, as Jo Win was explaining, since the founding of post-colonial Burma as an independent country, there has been the development of a type of nationalism which has become increasingly ethno-nationalist, certainly one which equates, the true Burmese national as being one who is of the Burman ethnicity as well as the Buddhist religion. And that has been a trend which has taken place over many, many decades, and has also taken place under a situation of military rule. So I think it would be unrealistic to expect that the types of forms of institutionalized discrimination and prejudice which emerged through that regime of dictatorship would disappear overnight. And I think that what we're seeing, there might be, I think it's a mix. You do have economic reasons, you do have political reasons, and I think you also have a very strong social base which actually probably agrees with actually a lot of this very discriminating portrayal and marginalization and persecution, in fact, of religious minorities, particularly Muslims, and in particular the Rohingya. So I think it's a combination of issues. I wouldn't point to one particular factor, but it's a very, very serious problem, and I think one which the Burmese government and the international community needs to really take very seriously indeed.
And outside the Rohingya communities, the Muslims in Mandalay, for example, near where Meiktila happens, I mean, are they perhaps shopkeepers or something? Is there some kind of class element? People feel that Muslims are, running all the businesses or anything of that kind? Is that part of it?
Yeah, as a whole, not only in Meiktila, in Mandalay city, the whole Burma, the authority of the predecessors of the Thein government as well, from General Ne Win, more than 4 or 5 decades, they have demonized Muslim community as a national threat for the national security or Buddhism. So you can imagine how the degree is increasing. It's not never diminished. Diminishing is so far, very far. I mean, not even reduced. It's increasing every year, every time. Whenever you see the scale of the attack, scale of the violence against Muslim community in Burma, it's increasing and it's very threatening. It's really very, very high sort of, killing small children. And it is not normal way. The people who carrying out this kind of atrocities, they are well trained.
Right. Okay, well, we also spoke to Asad Baig, who's a freelance journalist who was actually on the ground covering the Meiktila massacre last year.
In the run-up to the Meiktila violence, I think a few weeks before, even a month, there had been hate speeches by the controversial Buddhist monk Wirathu. And he'd obviously gone around and said what he said in other places around Burma, which is to say that Muslims you should not do business with Muslims, should not marry Muslims, and refer to them as animals. So this kind of hate speech was done in the run-up to the violence that took place in Meiktila. And the Muslim population was very afraid because they feared for their lives. There had been over 50 people killed, many children killed from the local madrasa in cold blood. And recently, when I went back, I also spoke to eyewitnesses that saw some of the children murdered. And in full view of the police, and the police were helpless against the Buddhist mobs. I think, in the eyes of the West, maybe, Burma's improving, is opening up for business, is opening up in terms of, press freedom. Maybe that's the way they see it. But essentially, I think if you're a minority in Burma, things haven't got better. Actually, the West attitude towards Burma is almost seen as a rubber stamp of approval of their oppression. And we have to remember that the state is very much involved, or is seen as very much involved in the oppression of Rohingya and its minorities.
Well, Tun Kin, we come back to you. I mean, what channels of representation do the Rohingya have? I mean, do they have members of parliament? How do they get their voice across? Can they do anything?
Well, when you look at the Rohingya issue in Burma, even though they are denying our citizenship, Rohingya were historically, every elections Rohingya have participated. They have right to vote and right to elect. There is 3 Rohingya MP currently in Naypyidaw Parliament from Union Solidarity Development Party. So they are raising from their sides, but the problem is that USDP party is, a kind of, they are involved in this violence.
That is the government party, is it?
That is the government party.
So they're actually MPs for the governing party?
Yes, but they are Rohingya, they are pushing ahead for the issues, but unfortunately, the majority, the party policy is, towards the Rohingya is.
What about in the media?
negative.
Is the Rohingya issue covered at all in a sympathetic way at all in the media?
Well, when you talk about Rohingya issue in Burma, in parliament, in business sector, in civil society, and political party representations, and even public, anti-Rohingya campaign is very strong because of the government-backed medias are writing all hate speech against Rohingya and other Muslims. Mm-hmm. And it's quite encouraged. We have to look at how it is encouraged. After 2012, ethnic cleansing to the Rohingyas, which is, pre-planned violence against Rohingya, June and October. The president thinks he met July 2012, UNHCR High Commissioner, and he mentioned that Rohingyas are not citizens of Burma. Mm-hmm. The solution for the Rohingyas is keeping them in the camps and sending them to the third countries. Mm-hmm. So with his own words, he mentioned Rohingyas are illegal immigrants, Bengali. So his word encouraged the whole public. Like when you look at me, even though my grandfathers and forefathers were born and brought up in Arakan State, Burma, but they will look at me like I'm an illegal immigrant, the whole public view. That's how they, design.
I just want to bring Lillian Fan back in because she won't be able to stay with the discussion in the second half. Lillian Fan, I mean, recently there was a census in Burma, and the Rohingya weren't allowed to recognize or self-identify as Rohingya. I mean, did the UN make any real attempt to rectify that at all? Because I believe the UN was helping to run the census.
That's right. That's right. UNFPA was, which is the population fund. They were helping technically with the conduct of the census. And I think, many of us who were observing this were quite concerned, very concerned actually, about, the international position on the census. And that really had to do with the fact that the categories, classifications of groups that were being used in the census were those of the 1982 citizenship law, which is in itself a highly contentious document. So there was actually a lot of warning, that had been given by certain analysts and members of the international community, observers, think tanks and others, who had really given warning to say that the census was so problematic in its design that actually it shouldn't really be something that the international community should be supporting uncritically. And unfortunately, the international community did decide, not all, I would say some donors and some agencies decided to support the census. And I think that that was, in hindsight, not the best decision. And it's, not because the census isn't important. It's, of course, incredibly important to hold a census in any country, particularly for, social data and details on development status and statistics and such. However, under these current conditions, when you do have, number one, so much discrimination against particular religious minorities, and number two, an ethnic peace process that's going on, which is unfolding as we speak, conducting a census which is so ethnicized and so, so sort of stuck in its ethnic and religious categories is it's incredibly problematic. And I think that the international community didn't really take the best position on that. The UN did speak up when it was made very clear that the Rohingya would not be able to self-identify. But those of us who've been giving warning that this would happen, including many of the Muslim groups and many other ethnic minorities who were giving warning about this, they were not surprised at all that the Burmese government sort of, actually didn't have the intention of recognizing the Rohingya at all. So that really goes against, international standards, actually, of census conduct. And many things that are taking place in Myanmar right now do go against international standards and also go against the Burmese government's own commitments to democratic reform. And I am somebody who does think that some reforms have been made, but I do think that what's taking place now with the persecution of Muslims and the Rohingya in particular really stands to undermine the positive changes that have taken place.
All right,
I think that unless
well, thank you for that.
they're addressed, it's very dangerous.
Thank you for that. We're going to be discussing that in much more detail in the second half of the programme, the whole international community's attitude to this, and of course the attitude of Burma's leading human rights champion, Aung San Suu Kyi. So stay with us for the continuation after the break.